This house is for me and my parents. Write up the divorce papers and get out.
My husband Leon, who has been treating me like a maid and always favoring his parents, is again saying whatever he pleases. I've been patient so far to avoid upsetting my parents, who were so happy about our marriage, but if he's going to behave like this in front of them, it suits me fine. Alright, I'll do as you say. I left the room, taking my distraught parents with me. When will he realize his numerous misunderstandings? I'm looking forward to it. My name is Jessica, 29 years old. I was born when both of my parents were 40 years old. They wanted a child, but it didn't come easy, and infertility treatments were not as advanced as they are now, so they had a lot of distress. Just as they were about to give up on having a child, that's when I came into their lives, and even now my parents still talk about it joyfully. Being the long-awaited child, I was doted on immensely by my parents. Even when looking at my childhood photos, I can feel the love my parents had for me. Although my parents were not wealthy, they always celebrated events like my birthday, Easter, and my kindergarten graduation in a grand manner. They were also very supportive of my studies. If I said I wanted to learn English, they immediately enrolled me in an English conversation class, and they bought me a lot of books because I loved reading. They also said, "If it's something you need for your studies, just let us know and we'll get it for you." Looking back, I now realize that they must have struggled quite a bit to cover my education expenses, but they never showed it. They always treated me with smiles and celebrated greatly when I got good grades. As I grew older, sometimes my friends would mistake my parents for my grandparents, but I never minded. I met my now husband Leon at a matchmaking service. Leon, like me, was an only child with elderly parents, and our circumstances were similar. We had the same hobbies, and our conversations were lively. We dated smoothly and decided to get married. My loving parents were in tears at our wedding, blessing our marriage. At first, I was working after our marriage, but Leon proposed.
We both have elderly parents. Of course, we don't feel dissatisfied about it, but wouldn't it be nice if they were younger? It's tough to raise a child in old age. We want to have children sooner, so can you quit your job and focus on raising a child?
I loved my job, but what Leon said made sense. I remembered my mother telling me that her night shift job and the stress from it, as well as not being able to get the timing right for conception, might have been reasons why they had difficulty having me. I thought it might be a good idea to quit my job and focus on creating a conducive environment for having a baby. Plus, Leon said,
"You can return to work when our child is old enough,"
which reassured me. Fortunately, I had a professional certification that would allow me to return to work anytime. So, I quit my job and became a full-time homemaker. However, after our marriage, Leon started acting high and mighty just because I was a homemaker. Before we got married, I thought Leon treated me as an equal, but after, he started acting as if he was superior. Being a housewife isn't exactly a walk in the park. Between cooking 3 meals a day, cleaning, laundry, things I used to casually handle when I was alone became a challenge, especially since Leon is particular about details and won't allow any slack.
Dinner should always consist of at least 3 dishes. Also, ensure there's hot pancakes for breakfast. My mom managed to do that even while working. When I wake up in the morning, my suit and shirt should be ready on the hanger. Just grab my bag and go. That's the least you can do as a housewife. That's how my parents always did it.
Every time I tried to object, he would retort,
"You're a housewife, aren't you? Don't get too high and mighty while eating off my dime."
That became his catchphrase. Despite his complaints about me eating off his dime, the money Leon gave for household expenses was barely enough. I spent my days scrutinizing our budget, constantly scouring the internet for money-saving tips. One day, given the situation, I mused out loud, maybe I should go back to work.
Leon responded with, "Didn't you say you used to work at a law firm? Being a secretary there won't make much money. I won't allow you to neglect housework for that."
So he wouldn't even let me return to work. I wondered if Leon was misunderstanding something. However, by this time, I was too tired of his constant complaints and shouting to argue. And truthfully, I wasn't sure if I could maintain the quality of housekeeping and care for Leon if I was also working. Moreover, I didn't want to upset my parents, who were so happy about our marriage, so I couldn't confide in them. But it wasn't just Leon's attitude that bothered me. He frequently invited his parents to our house. Mother's Day, Father's Day, his parents' birthdays. He would find any excuse to invite them over and have me prepare the meal. On these occasions, Leon would give me extra money, instructing me to buy some good fish or make a steak from premium beef. Every time we hosted his parents, Leon would give them gifts. His parents would eat and drink to their heart's content, treating our house as if it was their own, without thanking me, and then they'd leave. Once, I asked Leon, "I think it's great that you honor your parents, and I don't oppose it, but can we also invite my parents occasionally?" Leon immediately turned sour and snapped.
"Why would we do that? Understand this. I'm the one paying for the meals and gifts. Why should I spend money on your parents who aren't even blood related to me?"
He dismissed the suggestion. Resigned, I started secretly using my savings from before I was married to buy presents for my parents. Then one day, my parents contacted me looking troubled. They told me there was a fire in the apartment next to their house, and part of their home was burned down. Thankfully, they were unharmed, but the house required major repairs. They were temporarily living in a makeshift house. I decided to visit my parents. Even though they were going through a tough time, they welcomed me warmly. When my father gently asked, "Is your marriage going well?" a twinge of sadness hit me as I replied, "Yes, we're getting along all right." When I inquired about their future plans, he explained that their partially burned down house had been standing since my great-grandfather's era and was incredibly old to begin with, so they were thinking about letting it go. They were considering moving into a rental apartment going forward. My mother sighed. "Even though it's an old house, it's filled with memories of Jessica, so it's sad to let it go." At that moment, I made up my mind. I decided to discuss this with Leon when I got home. "Do you remember I mentioned that my parents' house was caught in a fire and burned down? Given their age, I was thinking of buying them a new house, maybe one equipped with accessibility features." Leon curtly retorted,
"Huh? Where's the money coming from? I'm not putting in a dime."
Just as I'd expected, I replied, "I'm not planning on building a mansion, so it won't be a burden on you. I intend to use my savings from my single days." Leon pondered for a bit, then casually responded,
"Guess even a law firm clerk can save that much. Well, if you're not using my money, then it's fine."
So I decided to give my parents a house. I felt it was high time I paid back their kindness. Several months later, "Leon, I'm helping my parents move tomorrow," I told him.
Leon replied, "All right, I got it. But don't neglect your house chores,"
then retreated to the bedroom. The next day, I went to help my parents move. Unbeknownst to me, a group of individuals had begun tailing me at that point. We carried my parents' belongings into the house, and we were relaxing in the living room. We were all filled with joy at being together as a family after so long. But then Leon and my in-laws suddenly barged in. While we stared in bewilderment, Leon declared,
"From today, this is my house."
I was taken aback by Leon's sudden appearance. "Why are you here?" When I asked this, he haughtily replied,
"I heard you were moving today, so I followed you."
When I responded, "What? My house? What are you talking about? I don't understand,"
Leon stated, "I've been supporting you all this while. Just marrying someone as clueless as you is something you should be grateful for. My parents have always eaten your terrible cooking with patience. Now it's your turn to return the favor."
What a repulsive man. As I stared at him in silence, Leon continued,
"I've canceled the lease on our apartment. Take your stuff and get out."
At that moment, my confused father started to say,
"Leon, this house."
But I stopped him from speaking. Strangely calm, a plan was taking shape in my mind. Instead of my father, I said, "This house is our home, my parents and me. What are you talking about?" When I relayed that, Leon replied laughing.
Don't you understand English? I'm saying the house you bought was my house all along. This is now my parents' house and mine. Oh, I also left divorce papers at home. You be sure to submit them.
Ignoring my parents' attempts to speak, I told him, "All right, I will follow your instructions." Then I asked the movers to reload the truck we had just unloaded, instructing them on what to do. As this happened, another truck arrived, carrying Leon's and his parents' belongings. I reassured my unsettled parents by saying, "I will explain everything later. Just follow my instructions for now." We then left the house together. During our ride, I explained to my parents what was going on. "Listen, I've kept quiet about this until now." Once they heard everything, they understood and praised my actions. It reminded me of the joy I felt as a child when I was praised by my parents. A few weeks later, I got repeated calls from Leon. Reluctantly, I answered the phone. Without waiting for my hello, Leon shouted,
"Hey, isn't this the house you bought? Someone just told me they're going to call the cops if I don't leave."
"Yeah, that's correct. So when you said that house was ours, I was taken aback. That rental was your house, huh?" I replied, laughing. This made Leon absolutely livid.
"Hey, quit mocking me. Just explain it. Wasn't that house bought for your parents?"
Then I explained everything to Leon step by step. The house that I had bought for my parents was under renovation after the purchase. However, the day before moving in, the renovation company told us, due to our mistake, the work will not be finished on the scheduled date. It was entirely the renovation company's fault. Since they had contacted us in the evening, it was too late to cancel the movers. The renovation company, taking responsibility for their mistake, arranged a rental house for us to live in until the real house was ready. It was a model home that had finished its exhibition period. We planned to live there until the renovations were completed, but Leon and his parents moved in by mistake. When my parents tried to clarify, I decided to get revenge based on Leon's terrible misinterpretation. After that, I stored all of our belongings in a rented storage unit and lived in a hotel with my parents. Meanwhile, I submitted the divorce papers prepared by Leon as he had instructed, and that's how I got divorced from him. My parents told me you should have consulted us sooner. However, I think things turned out for the best. I was able to spend time with my parents and managed to divorce Leon. Now, I'm living with my parents in our newly renovated house. I've deliberately not shared our new address with Leon, so he has no idea where we live. Leon once asked me,
"But how are you going to support yourself without me? You were just a stay-at-home wife, right?"
With a sigh, I answered, I didn't expect you to be under this misconception for so long, but my profession is a lawyer,
Huh?
Leon seemed shocked and responded with a confused reply. When I first met Leon at a matchmaking service, he asked me what I did for a living. I told him that I worked at a law firm. He assumed I was a secretary. I let him believe that because when I'd previously mentioned being a lawyer, people often remarked how stuffy it sounded or how they didn't like being corrected based on the law. I hadn't imagined he'd continue to mistake me for a secretary after that. It showed how little interest he really had in me. I guess Leon wanted a housewife more than a partner. I think the reason he asked me to be a stay-at-home wife was just that. I bought the house with the savings I had from my time as a single lawyer.
If you explain that, well, we're married, so I should have a claim to the property.
I responded, "The savings I had before marriage are mine, and they're not subject to property division. If you have a problem with that, we can go to court, but I'll win, of course." Hearing this, Leon fell silent on the other end of the phone. I ignored such remarks from Leon, saying, "Well then, goodbye. Be nice to your beloved parents." And with that, I hung up the phone. I heard about what happened next through a fellow attorney who used to be my colleague. Leon kept contacting me, unable to accept the situation, so I reluctantly decided to communicate with him through my attorney. Leon was insisting on me returning the money we had spent during our married life. However, after discussions through the lawyer, he understood that it was not feasible and seemed quite disappointed. That's expected. After all, I became a stay-at-home wife because Leon asked me to, and it's a husband's duty to provide for his family. I did everything that I should have as a homemaker, and I didn't fall short. Leon had terminated our apartment lease himself, leaving him with no place to stay. Currently, he has moved back into the small condo where his parents lived, and the three of them are living there, uncomfortably crammed into the small space. Leon had virtually no savings. He had a low salary, and yet, he made me stay at home, only gave me the bare minimum for living expenses, and spent the rest of the money on his hobbies and gifts for his parents. Despite this, Leon was starting to desire a larger house. He seemed to have come up with this plan when I mentioned to my parents that I wanted to buy a house. Needless to say, it failed spectacularly. Even if it weren't a temporary home, assuming that we would leave quietly is just stupid. It's pathetic to realize how naive my ex-husband was. Leon is now tired of caring for his parents in the cramped condo, and he has been pressing for reconciliation many times, now that he knows I'm a lawyer. Of course I've been ignoring him. I'm currently enjoying my time in my new house with my parents. At the moment, I'm not particularly keen on getting married again. However, a fellow attorney who I worked with during my divorce from Leon has been showing some interest. I am considering being a bit more positive about it, perhaps to give my beloved parents the joy of seeing their grandkids sooner.
My dad and mom will be staying with us for 2 weeks starting this weekend, my husband casually declared after returning from work. Without even bothering to ask me, he would unilaterally decide when his parents would visit, and I had reached my limit with his arrogance. Wait a minute, again? They were just here last month, weren't they? What's your problem? Are you treating my parents as if they're intruders? That's not what I meant. You're my wife, and all you need to do is make them feel welcome. My husband treats me like a housemaid. It seems like he didn't care about how I felt. I can't bear this kind of life anymore. Just because they're my in-laws, it doesn't mean that I should tolerate everything. I'm definitely going to escape from this situation. My name is Judy. I'm 30 years old. 3 years ago, I married my coworker and resigned from my job when we got married. I want you to be a full-time housewife and support family, my husband asked me, so I became a homemaker. 2 years after we got married, I became pregnant. Currently, I'm living busy days, raising our 1-year-old daughter, Alice. My husband's name is Kyle, who is also 30 years old. Recently, he seems to be in line for a promotion at his company. Due to this, he's been working a lot of overtime and weekend shifts, so we seldom have time as a family. Normally, he'd contact me if he's going to be late, but on this day, he hadn't come home even when it was 8 p.m. I became worried and texted him, but there was no response. After waiting anxiously, he finally came home just after midnight. You're still up. Why didn't you respond even once? I messaged you so many times. I couldn't help it, right? I was doing overtime. Overtime? No matter how busy you are, couldn't you at least send a single text saying, I'm doing overtime and will be late? I was worried because there was no response from you at all. Judy, you're being overly dramatic. Stop making such a fuss just because I got home a little late. What's with that tone? I was worried about you. It seemed my worries are not reaching him at all. Kyle just responded with the flat, yeah, sorry about that, and headed to the bathroom. He wasn't always like this. The changes in Kyle began after our daughter was born a year ago. That being said, I believe Kyle was genuinely happy about Alice's birth. Although he wasn't present during the delivery, he came to the hospital right after she was born. Both sets of parents were delighted, and I still remember how truly happy we were. The following month after Alice's birth, the in-laws came to stay with us, and they stayed for 2 whole weeks. I was exhausted, mentally and physically, from my single-handed newborn baby care, but Kyle decided to invite the in-laws without consulting me. Of course, I firmly protested, but Kyle persisted. My folks just want to see their grandchild. He didn't care about my opinions. Whenever I showed any signs of displeasure, he would respond with even more irritation. And he would always spit out the same line. Are you treating my parents like they're in your way? He said. That was the trigger, And from that point on, the in-laws began to stay at our house for 2 weeks, almost every month. While they played with Alice, they did not lift a finger to help with household chores. I was the only one who had to take care of their laundry, meals, and everything on top of looking after Alice. Kyle was often coming home late due to overtime and away working on weekends, so dealing with his parents fell entirely onto me. The additional burden was unbearable, as I was already overwhelmed with taking care of Alice. Nevertheless, that day, Kyle casually announced, "Oh, by the way, my folks are coming to stay again this weekend." Wait a minute, again? They were just here last month. What, are you treating my parents like they're in the way? That's not what Anyway, you're my wife, and you should host them nicely. Kyle never agreed with my opinions, and my frustrations kept piling up day by day. But thinking of my little daughter, I couldn't just leave him. At that time, all I could do was silently accept what he said. A few days later, as usual, my husband left for work, and the doorbell rang just after 10 a.m. Here they are again. Considering Kyle is at work, it would be nicer if they could at least come late in the afternoon or even in the evening. Holding these grievances within, I opened the front door. Sure enough, there stood my in-laws. Somehow I managed to force a smile. "Good morning, Father, Mother." "Hey there, Judy. Here we are again." "Where's little Alice? Let me hold her right away." Alice is in her room, but she just fell asleep. "What? She's sleeping? Then I'll hold her." "Wait a minute, dear. I'm the one who should hold her first." As they engaged in this banter, they barged into the house. They lifted Alice, sleeping peacefully in her crib, and started a tug-of-war over her. I tried to stop them. "She's sleeping." But they paid no heed. Crying out over who gets to hold Alice, they ended up waking her up with the noise. And then, of course, Alice started crying. As soon as Alice started crying, the in-laws thrusted her back at me. "Oh, she's crying again. This kid cries all the time, doesn't she?" "Yeah, really? Kyle didn't cry this much. Judy, are you sure you're giving her enough love?" "Of course I am." I couldn't stand their comments any longer, so I chimed in. "She usually sleeps just fine. She's crying now because the two of you were shouting over her." "What? Are you trying to say it's our fault?" "Oh, goodness, Judy, that's a harsh thing to say. We're here trying to dote on our granddaughter, and instead of thanking us, you complain." "I didn't mean to complain. It's just that—" "Now I've got a bad taste in my mouth. I'm feeling a bit peckish, too. Can you make us something?" "Well, I'm going to take a break. Judy, can you brew us some tea? Oh, and don't forget the cookies." Despite Alice crying at the top of her lungs, they behave just like that. If they're hungry, they could eat outside. If they want tea, they could brew it themselves. Even though I thought that in my heart, I couldn't say it out loud. I stood in the kitchen holding my sobbing daughter and catered to my in-laws' demands. For the next 2 weeks, I was busy without a break. My in-laws, and of course, my husband, didn't help with the housework at all. Eventually, I couldn't bear it anymore, and the night my in-laws left, I complained to my husband. "Hey, about your parents, can't they reduce the frequency of their visits a bit?" "What are you talking about? You're saying you don't like my parents coming?" My husband immediately retorted, and I was taken aback. "It's not that I dislike it, I just think they visit too often. Plus, staying for 2 weeks, that's way too long." "It's just 2 weeks, isn't it? Besides, they don't come every month. Don't complain too much." My husband sighed deeply and didn't even try to make eye contact with me. Nothing was going to be changed for the better. I thought, and I pleaded with him again. "Listen to me. Seriously. I'm busy taking care of Alice, and it's tough to also take care of your parents on top of it. Kyle, you don't even help me at all, and I've got too much on my shoulders." "Huh? Don't talk like my parents are a burden. They're taking care of Alice, and I can't believe you can say such a thing." "Taking care? As soon as Alice cries, they push her on to me. You're always like that, Kyle, just doting on her when you're in a good mood, and you're not really caring for her." "Give me a break. Do you realize who you and Alice are living off of?" "What? Why do you have to bring it up? I became a housewife because you wanted me to, Kyle." "Shut up. Isn't it the fact that you're living off my money? Stop complaining and properly treat my parents." His loud shouting voice woke up Alice. Immediately, Alice started to cry, and he left the room with an annoyed look on his face. Why? How can he make such a face to his own daughter? It's his fault that Alice woke up in the first place, because he was shouting. Can't he help with housework and childcare just a little? I had nowhere to direct my anger and frustration, and tears welled up in my eyes. Hidden by the sound of my daughter's cries, I wept quietly. Even after that, my relationship with my husband didn't improve, and the days passed by. It had been a while. Around that time, I received a phone call from my mother who lives far away. "Hello, Judy. Do you have any plans this weekend?" "No plans in particular. What's up?" "Well, actually, there's a funeral of a friend nearby. I haven't seen Alice for so long. I was thinking I'd like to visit." "Really? I'd be so happy. Please come visit." "Oh, I'm glad. If it's not too much trouble, could I possibly stay for one night?" "Of course. I'll let Kyle know." The unexpected news of my mother's visit filled me with joy. What should we eat? What should we talk about? I was filled with anticipation. But when I told my husband about my mother's visit when he got home, he returned an unexpected answer. "Huh? What are you talking about? That's out of the question." Wait a minute. Why is it out of the question?" "This weekend, my mom and dad are coming over. We don't have room to accommodate your mother. I don't want to be bothered either." "Huh? Your parents are coming again?" "Stop saying again. We should be grateful they're even coming." "Huh? Grateful? What is he talking about? I don't see how this is something to be grateful for when it only adds to my burden. Normally, I would back down to avoid a fight, but I couldn't give in this time. I made up my mind and once again confronted him. "Isn't it strange? Why is it fine for your parents but not for my mother?" "Huh? Well, of course the husband's parents come first." "What? That's not fair. And the ratio is off. Your parents are here nearly every month, but my mother can't even come once a year? Since Alice was born, my mother hasn't seen her." "Well, send her some photos or something. She doesn't need to come all the way. She's only coming because she has a funeral to attend. It's only for one night. Why do you always prioritize your parents so much? You're the worst." The words I blurted out, "You're the worst," seemed to have struck a nerve. He furrowed his brows and glared at me. You'd better watch out your attitude." I just meant just for one day we could have my mother." "Enough. I'm the one paying for the rent, the groceries, all the living expenses. In other words, I get to decide who gets to come to this house. Shut up and do as I say, you parasite." At that moment, all the frustrations I had been suppressing exploded. All I asked was to host my mother for just one day. And yet, why do I have to be berated like this? And a parasite? Really? How could he say such a thing? Who does he think does all the housework while he's out making money? Enough is enough. I'll show him. It was at that moment that I decided to divorce my husband. To set an appropriate stage for it, just a little more patience was needed. I ended up explaining the situation to my mother and told her we couldn't host her. The weekend arrived and the in-laws came. My husband, unusually, had no work that day. "Thanks for hosting us again, Judy. Is Alice awake yet?" "Yes, she's awake." "Oh, what perfect timing." "Let me hold her." Like always, the in-laws stormed into our house without any hesitation. My husband just sat there, grinning like a fool. While I was preparing some tea, my mother-in-law and husband approached me grinning. "Judy, we always feel bad, but since we help look after Alice like this, you must be grateful, right?" "Absolutely. It's all thanks to Mom and Dad. Oh, by the way, Judy, this time they're staying for 3 weeks." "That's fine. This will be the last time anyway." Upon hearing my reply, my husband and his parents let out a synchronized, "Huh?" After a moment of shock, my husband frantically asked, "Hey, Judy, what the hell are you saying? What do you mean by the last time?" "I mean exactly what I said. I can't deal with you all anymore." "What? Don't joke with me. If you keep talking like that, I'll divorce you." "Fine." "What?" "Here you go." I handed him the divorce papers I had filled out in advance. The color drained from Kyle's face as I thrust the papers at him. "What the hell is this? A joke, right?" "Do you think I'd joke about this? I'm serious. I've told my mom, and I've decided to leave this house and go back to my parents' home. What? I won't let you do that. We are not getting a divorce. Even his parents joined in as I stood there in silence. What Kyle says is right. You've been leeching off of him, and now you're acting all high and mighty. You're living off Kyle, and yet you're taking this attitude even with us. The three of them started hurling insults at me one after another, but I no longer needed to endure it. They are no longer my family or anything else to me. Taking a deep breath, I let them have it. Enough with you and your goddamn bullshit. You think just because I'm quiet, you can say whatever you want? Do you have any idea how much I've had to put up with? It was the first time I've ever talked back like this in front of them. So all three of them were taken aback. Eventually, Kyle started opening and closing his mouth as if he wanted to say something, but I didn't let him and continued. I wouldn't wish to be part of a family like yours anymore. Taking care of Alice? You're just intruding for your own satisfaction. Just holding her when she's in a good mood doesn't mean you're looking after her. Well, wait, Judy, let's calm down a bit. Shut up. Since Alice was born, how many times have you changed her diaper, fed her a bottle, bathed her? You're just messing around with her when she's in a good mood. You let your parents stay over all the time, but not my mom? That's bullshit. Why should only your parents be treated so well? I've had enough of babysitting you three. My outburst left the three of them standing there in shock. Having vented all my grievances, I grabbed my bare essentials, picked up Alice, and left the house. I then headed straight for my parents' house. I had already told my parents about the situation, so they warmly welcomed me. I ignored all the calls and emails from Kyle. If he refuses to agree to the divorce, I'm considering going for mediation. The divorce will most likely proceed on the grounds of his fault, because I discovered his affair. The woman he was cheating with was a colleague from the company where I used to work. One of my ex-colleagues who had worked at the same place as him told me about the affair and even provided photos as evidence. All his claims of working late or on weekends were lies. No wonder he gradually became distant after Alice was born. Based on the evidence of the affair, I hired a lawyer, and eventually the divorce was finalized. I was able to collect the agreed-on alimony from Kyle. Of course, I reported the affair to our company, and both my ex-husband and his mistress were fired. Their relationship seemed to have quickly fizzled out due to this, and they parted ways. Having lost his job, and with the alimony payment creating a debt, I heard that he's now constantly being hounded by debt collectors. His parents, my former in-laws, who used to rely on him, are apparently now having a harder life than before. I don't have a shred of sympathy for them, since it's all a product of their own actions. As for me, I've been raising my daughter, with the support of my parents at our family home. There are tough times, sure, but thanks to my parents' help, we're managing to lead a peaceful life. My daughter is only a year old. There will come a day when she'll wonder about her father. When that day comes, I'll explain everything to her in words that she can understand. I plan to pour all the love I can into my daughter for as long as I can.
Please, go out with me on the premise of marrying me. Paul, whom I had met through a friend's introduction, asked me out on a date. He, who is 3 years younger than me, told me that he had fallen in love with me at first sight. Considering my age and the fact that I had been contemplating marriage, I decided to accept his offer. We eventually got married a year later. My name is Michelle. I'm 34 years old and I work for an international corporation. I've always dreamed of living abroad. My husband Paul, despite being younger, is a natural-born leader and can be described as the dominant one in our relationship. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say he's the head of the household, but I didn't mind it. Having lived alone for a long time, I was accustomed to taking care of household chores, and I even enjoyed cooking. Paul rarely helped out, but I never found chores burdensome. On the other hand, Paul always took the lead when we went out together, allowing me to simply enjoy myself without having to worry about anything. This felt like a good balance between us. However, all of this started to change when my mother passed away. While I was at work, I received a call from my father informing me that my mother's chronic illness had worsened, and she had collapsed. I immediately boarded the train and arrived at the hospital in about 2 hours, where I bid a final farewell to my mother. I decided to stay with my father to prepare for my mother's funeral. When I contacted Paul, he said that he couldn't leave work at short notice. He ended up not coming to the wake. He did make it to the funeral, but it seemed that he hadn't made any preparations for mourning attire. I had to hastily arrange a rental outfit for him. He complained incessantly, saying that I should have prepared everything from the beginning. Between my sorrow and being busy, I didn't have the capacity to deal with Paul, so I let his complaints slide. But apparently, he didn't appreciate that, as he was in a foul mood throughout. Ever since then, it feels like our marital arguments have increased. Well, after being married for 3 years, I think it's normal to have some quarrels. But even so, Paul has been picking fights rather aggressively recently. With his persistent domineering attitude, he often dictated what I should do and take care of. I got fed up and even tried refusing a few times. But since he didn't know how things were organized inside the house, even simple tasks like preparing for his own business trips would take a long time. Moreover, he would complain while bustling around the house, making an even bigger mess. In the end, I realized it's easier if I just do it myself. I wasn't being completely obedient. I took care of certain things to save myself the trouble. Next week is the gathering for my mom's first death anniversary. I'm going to start preparing for us to join, okay? When I said that, Paul responded grumpily. I have an important meeting that day. What should I do? I've mentioned this gathering well in advance. How could he suddenly say something like that? What, you're not going? Paul responded with a heavy sigh. It's not that, but it'll be tough to delegate everything to my juniors, you know? He seems happy about his recent promotion and constantly talks to me about his junior team members at every opportunity. I felt like sighing right back at him. Please plan for it, okay? I emphasized. It was the day before my mother's first death anniversary gathering. When I got home from work, Paul was sulking and drinking beer in the living room. I'm sorry I'm late. I had to work overtime. I'm sure he's in a bad mood because I came home late, causing a delay in dinner preparation. I've been waiting here for an hour, just as I thought. But it's just 1 hour, isn't it? If he couldn't prepare his own dinner, he could have gone out to buy something. I did let him know what time I'd be home, so he could have taken some initiative and done things on his own. Suppressing the urge to say all that, I handed him a takeout box. I thought it'd take too long if I cooked, so I picked this up on my way home instead. In response, Paul slammed a glass filled with beer onto the table. Takeout again? Aren't you slacking off a bit too much lately? Again? The last time I brought home takeout was about 2 weeks ago. Sure, I've been busy lately, and maybe I haven't been cooking a feast every day. Nevertheless, I'm mindful of maintaining a balanced nutritional intake and rarely rely on prepackaged items. So I don't think I deserve that kind of criticism. As I was considering whether to retort or not, Paul, misunderstanding something, decided to pour salt in the wound. Can't say anything because it's true, huh? Do your chores properly. You've been coming home late lately, saying you're working overtime. You're probably just out having an affair. Paul shouted. His words sparked a flare of resentment that had been building in me. Enough is enough. If you know I'm working late, the least you can do is prepare dinner for us. It's fine if you can't cook. Picking up some takeout isn't too hard to do, is it? I always make sure to inform you when I'm going to be late, and even with the busyness, I take care of all our household chores. There's no need for that kind of tone. Paul gave me a glare. Huh? You're 3 years older than me, you know. I could have married a woman in her 20s, but I chose an older woman. Show some gratitude and do as I say. There's no one else who would want you, so you'd be in trouble if I were to leave you, wouldn't you? Did he really just say that? I was ticked off and couldn't hold back any longer. Then you should have married a younger woman. When we started dating and before we got married, didn't I ask if you were okay with me being older? You said it was okay, and that's why we got married. Even without you, I could have managed my life. Paul laughed mockingly at my words. Whatever, let's get a divorce. With that, Paul took his beer and the takeout box and retreated to his room. We've had our share of arguments, but this was a first. I was done with him. I decided to eat my takeout dinner to calm my nerves. He must have been irritated because he was hungry. That's what I thought as I filled my stomach, but I couldn't settle down after all. I couldn't believe this was happening the day before my mother's first death anniversary. After some time had passed, I called out to Paul from outside his room. We need to leave by 8 a.m. tomorrow, so I'll wake you up around 7. There was no response, but I could sense that he was awake, so he must have heard me. With those words spoken, I went to sleep. The next morning when I woke up early, Paul was already gone. The bags I had prepared were still in the room. It didn't seem like he headed to the gathering without me. Where did he disappear? I called his cell, but there was no answer. There was no response to my texts either. Since there was no other choice, I left a voicemail message and started preparing to head out on my own. I got a hold of Paul while I was waiting for the train at the station. I have to go to my meeting. I can't leave it to my juniors after all. When I answered the phone and heard only that, I panicked. Wait, what? Hold on! Despite my words, my voice was drowned out by the noise of the train, and the call ended. Overwhelmed by an indescribable mix of anger and resignation, I found myself in a state of stunned bewilderment. Before I could think further, the train arrived. Carrying unnecessary luggage for two, I boarded the train alone. When I arrived at my father's house, my father asked anxiously, "Where's Paul?" My father had been depressed since my mother's passing, and I didn't want to worry him further. I took a deep breath, managed to put on a smile, and said, "Sorry, he got called into an important meeting. He was supposed to come here, but he recently got a promotion and it sounded like an important meeting, so I told him he should prioritize that." My father nodded, understanding the situation. "I see. He's working hard. It's a shame I couldn't see him, but your mother would understand. Tell him he's always welcome to visit." Those words stung a little, but I managed to keep up my smile. Throughout the day, there was no contact from Paul, and the night grew late without me reaching out to him either. I planned to stay the night and return home the next day. That was originally planned, so I didn't see an issue with not contacting Paul. Still, it felt like I was acting childish. Maybe I should cook him some hamburger tomorrow. His favorite dish. With that thought in mind, I went to sleep. The next day, I left my father's house and arrived at home around noon. I wanted to drop my bags off before going grocery shopping. I walked into our living room. As expected, Paul had left dirty laundry sitting around. I sighed at the thought that he still didn't know how to use the washing machine, and dumped the left-behind laundry in the washer with my own laundry. Taking a break and returning to the living room, I noticed something on the table. When I got closer, I couldn't believe my eyes. There were divorce papers, which he had already signed. Why? I stared at the divorce papers, bewildered. Is this his way of asking for a divorce? I pulled out my cell phone from my bag. It should be his lunch break around this time. I wasn't sure if Paul would pick up, but surprisingly, he did as soon as I called. "Paul? This divorce paper. What's this about?" On the other end of the line, Paul laughed. "What do you mean, what's this about? It's exactly as it looks. I don't need an older wife who isn't going to do household chores. That's why I decided I want a divorce. If I break up with you, I can even remarry a younger woman. At the end of the day, a wife is like a status symbol, right? I can't brag about you because you're older. It's quite challenging when my team members ask me about you, and evading the topic is no easy task." I was at a loss for words. I had nothing to say. If you don't want a divorce, then start doing your chores properly. I'm coming home as usual today, so don't forget to get some beer, alright? If you don't like that, take the divorce papers to the family court. It's up to you. With that, he hung up. The call ended without me getting a word in. I guess this is what it feels like to be too shocked to speak. Paul probably thought that if he said that, I would comply. I only did the chores because I didn't like to ask or beg him to do things. He must have thought all this time that I did it because I didn't want him to leave me. He must have thought I wouldn't stand up to him because he's the dominant one. Being married to a younger husband is sometimes envied, but really, there's nothing notable about it. I often found myself emphasizing the fact that my husband is younger. He's average in looks, average in personality, and earns an average income. There's nothing unique about him, so saying he's younger was just convenient. When we got married, I was worried about the age difference. But now we're both in our 30s, and he's only 3 years younger. If there was a decade or so between us, I might feel more affectionate. But it feels bad to be continuously called an older wife when we're practically the same age. I grabbed my bag and headed straight to the family court. When I submitted the divorce papers, I felt a sense of relief. I thought we were getting along fairly well, but that's over now. I can live without Paul. With that thought in mind, I felt a sudden sense of lightness, prompting me to contact my boss and request a few days of paid leave. Thankfully, the busy season at work had just ended, so he allowed me to take about a week off. Since I'm divorced now, I needed to sort out my belongings. I didn't have much stuff to begin with, so cleaning up was a breeze. I took the bigger items to a storage unit, packed my essentials and clothes in the car, and on a whim, I decided to head to a hot spring resort. It seemed to be the off-season for hotels, too, so I was able to book a stay at a cheap rate on the spot. I felt the excitement as I drove. As I enjoyed the hot springs and relaxed in my room, my phone rang. Michelle! I told you to get beer, didn't I? Where the hell are you? It's Paul's usual time to come home. I remembered hearing those words, and found it amusing. I'm at a hot spring resort right now. What? A hot spring resort? Why? What's going on? Didn't you say to file the divorce papers if I didn't agree with you? The flustered image of my ex-husband surfaced in my mind, and my laughter intensified. Hold on. Did you actually file it? Of course I did. Why? Why, you ask? It was your idea, Paul. Have you forgotten what you just said a few hours ago? Then I heard his clearly perturbed voice. Hey, you're joking, right? When you say hot spring resort, did you mean you went to some spa nearby? If that's the case, I'll pick up dinner, so just hurry back home. I couldn't stop laughing at the sudden, seemingly affectionate tone as he was proclaiming to be a caring husband. It was probably about an hour and a half of driving. There's even an outdoor natural hot spring. It's quite comfortable. I wonder if it will rain cats and dogs tomorrow since you're going out to buy your own dinner. I've already taken my belongings out so that you won't have to worry about me coming back. Please, take care of yourself. Paul was pleading desperately for me to return. But of course, I had no intention of going back. You're the one who prepared the divorce papers in the first place. Have you forgotten? It was blatantly obvious that you were using the threat of divorce to control me. I told you I could live without you. Now that you've divorced your older wife, you can go find a younger one. Whether you can or not, I don't know. Paul was completely silent. It might be none of my business, but you should probably consider moving out of that apartment too. Finally, Paul found his voice again. Why should I? His voice was barely a murmur. Think about your income. You'll go bankrupt soon if you keep living there. You can't clean, do laundry, cook. You'll have to use a housekeeping service and eat out, right? That costs money. It would be a problem if most of your salary went into rent. You thought you were the one providing for me, but my salary is actually almost double yours. You were never providing for me. If anything, it was the other way around. Also, you were acting all confident just because one junior came alone. But did you know that I have multiple juniors working under me, and even more juniors working under them? I don't usually talk about work because Paul gets moody, but I outranked him in both position and salary. You'd think he'd notice after living together, but it seemed like he was finding out for the first time. Perhaps Paul, being the dominant and proud man he is, kept his ego intact by looking down on me. Now that he can't look down on me, he must be feeling defeated. I've shattered his pride as payback for all these years. The reason I took care of household chores without complaining, even though you acted like a domineering husband at times, was partly because you were younger, and I cut you some slack. And partly because it was too much hassle to ask you for anything. It's not because I needed you to stay with me. I was just taking care of your needs while I was at it with my own chores. So when you said, do the chores or we divorce, of course I chose divorce. We're strangers now. Goodbye then. I said all I wanted to say and hung up. Feeling refreshed, I enjoyed the hotel's food. Afterwards, as expected, Paul reached out for reconciliation, but I told him with a smile, I'm older than you. I'm sure you don't want me back. Presumably, he wasn't successful with younger women. Eventually, Paul gave up and moved out of the apartment. I hired a lawyer for the division of assets, demanding more to compensate for the burden of household chores that had been imposed on me until now. Paul, being cheap, didn't hire a lawyer, and so I had the upper hand with my lawyer. We were able to reach an agreement with favorable conditions for me. By the way, it seems that Paul's only junior had been complaining to others about how poor his leadership was, to the point that he couldn't even consider him a boss. Paul overheard this, and they are currently in the midst of a dispute. He should have known how important it is to take care of your own junior. As for me, I had been offered a position at our overseas headquarters. I had been declining due to the current circumstances and out of consideration for Paul, but I finally decided to take on the opportunity. I'm currently preparing for my transition. I've been causing my father some worry, but we've started practicing video calls so we can keep in touch when I'm abroad. I am content because I'll be able to pursue the job that I have been dreaming of since I was a child. It's time to give it my all.
Man, I thought you'd be a smarter woman, being Nick's wife, but you're just hopeless. Nick sure did have a bad marriage.
Mark said, chuckling.
Now, hand over the checkbook. If you refuse, we're getting a divorce.
All right, but you'll regret this. When I said that, Mark probably didn't understand the meaning. He smiled confidently and said,
No, I won't.
Mark is mistaken. Either way, there's no way he's getting his hands on a fortune. And I've come up with a good plan. It would be great if Mark could learn his lesson. I'm Karen, 35 years old. 6 years ago, I married my husband Nick and led a happy life. I always thought I would continue to live a happy life, but my presumption was shattered 3 years later. Nick died in a car accident. Since then, I've been devastated and unable to recover. Mark, who was Nick's best friend, supported me during this time. He took me out, recommended good movies, and did all sorts of things to cheer me up. Thanks to him, I was able to recover from the shock of Nick's death 3 years later. I'm really grateful to Mark. Then, one day, Mark suddenly proposed.
Karen, will you marry me?
Huh?
I understand it's complicated because of Nick, but isn't it about time? You should think about your own happiness from now on.
Indeed, 3 years have passed, and I feel like I've recovered from the shock of Nick's death, and that's thanks to Mark more than anything. I hadn't considered it until now, probably because I felt guilty about Nick, but if I were to be with Mark, would Nick be happy?
I'll make you happy, not just for me, but for Nick too.
Looking at Mark, who said this and looked at me straight in the eyes, I decided to trust him. Okay, I understand. Thank you. And so, I decided to marry Mark. In the beginning, my marriage with Mark was going very well. At Mark's request, I became a housewife and devoted myself to household chores. After work, Mark would always send a text asking,
"What's for dinner tonight?"
and rush home. Although it was my second marriage, my newlywed life was very happy. Mark often helped around the house on his days off, and there were no complaints. I was hoping that this happy life would continue, but the situation started to look grim after about 6 months. It was around 11 p.m. when Mark finally came home. Hey, aren't you late? I've always told you to let me know when you'll be late.
There was a sudden invitation. What can I do? You could have just gone to bed first.
You could have at least texted. I have to prepare dinner.
It's not like it's a big deal. Stop nagging the moment I get home.
He said that and went straight to the bathroom. His coming home late isn't just today. It's been happening lately all the time. Moreover, there's never any communication from him. Not even a phone call, let alone a text message. He says he's at a company social, but I wonder if he really has to attend. Even on his days off, he doesn't help around the house at all anymore. When I say to him, Mark, who's lounging around at home, "Hey, you should at least help out around the house on your days off," he doesn't bother to respond, saying,
"Why do I have to tire myself out even on my days off? Isn't that your job? You're a homemaker, sort it out yourself."
Among all these complaints, the one thing that is most troubling me now is our household finances. Our household budget is such that Mark gives me the remainder of his salary after taking his own allowance as living expenses, but recently the amount he's been handing over is steadily decreasing. This month too, the amount was significantly less, so when I said, "Hey, the living expenses seem a bit low," Mark replied nonchalantly,
Maybe it's less because I deducted the amount I gave to my mother."
"How much did you give her?"
"About $1,000.
$1,000? I told you last month when you gave her $800 that it was too much. We don't have that kind of money to spare, you know. If you deduct your allowance from that, we won't have enough for living expenses."
"It can't be helped if she says she needs it. Make up for the shortfall with your savings or something."
"What do you mean by or something?"
"Why don't you get a part-time job or something? You're always just lounging around at home. You should do some work."
The reason I became a full-time homemaker was at Mark's request. I was taken aback by Mark's harsh words, but I realized I really needed to get a part-time job to make ends meet. I reluctantly started looking for a job. I found a part-time job that would only require me to work for a short period of time, and I got the job there. The part-time job allows me to return home in the evening, so it was convenient. One day, work ran a little late, and when I finally got home, the front door was unlocked. When I curiously looked at the entrance, I saw that Mark was already home. "Mark, you're already home?" I called out, and he turned around in surprise, hiding something at the same time. "Wait, what did you just hide?"
Nothing.
"Liar, you just hid something." I snatched something from Mark's hand and saw that it was my bank book. "Huh? What were you looking at? Stop it." He grinned and said,
"You've saved up quite a bit, huh? I had no idea. You're always saying we're short on money."
"That's not it. This is..."
"Well then, all that money should be transferred to my mother's account."
"Huh?"
"It's not, huh? It's only natural to entrust such a large sum to my mother."
"Why do I have to give your mother my money?"
"The wife's money is the mother-in-law's money. Don't you even know that? Hurry up and hand over the bank book."
"Absolutely not. This is my precious money."
"Just hand it over."
I ran away from Mark, who was trying to forcefully take my bank book, and locked myself in the bedroom. While Mark was pounding on the door, he shouted,
"Hey, you really are a money-grubbing woman. Hurry up and hand over the bank book."
"Who's the real money grubber here?" The bank book shows a balance of $300,000. It was supposed to be hidden deep in a drawer, yet Mark rummaged enough to find it, which disgusted me. This money is sacred. It must never be spent.
"Man, I thought you'd be a smarter woman, being Nick's wife, but you're just hopeless. Nick sure did have a bad marriage,"
said Mark, laughing. He can insult me all he wants, but he crossed the line when he insulted Nick, his best friend. That's when I realized I couldn't go on with this man. After some time, I heard the front door close. Mark seemed to have left. I exited the bedroom and confirmed that nobody was around. As I was pondering what to do next, all that came to my mind was divorcing Mark. If Nick saw me now, what would he say? With that thought, Nick's absence became overwhelmingly sad, and I started to cry. That's why this money must never be given to Mark. I put the bank book at once inside a locked suitcase. I waited for Mark to return, but he never did. Where could he have gone at such a time? Perhaps he gave up and went to drink. As the day turned into night without him returning, I ended up going to sleep. The next day, I woke up and Mark was still not home. I thought with a calmer mind than last night. There's no way I can continue to live like this. I don't want to hand over the bank book to Mark. He not only insulted me, but also Nick. I won't forgive him. For the time being, I packed only the necessary things. Right then, Mark returned home.
What? You're awake?
Where were you?
I went back to my parents' house. Just got back from the real estate agent.
Real estate agent?
With your $300,000, I bought a new house for my mom. Of course, it's a new single-family home.
Huh?
So hurry up and give me the bank book. If not, we're getting a divorce.
I understand.
Huh?
It's a divorce, isn't it? I'm fine with it.
No, well...
Mark was taken aback. Did he think I'd hand over the bank book easily if he mentioned divorce? Okay, but you'll regret it. When I said that, Mark probably didn't understand the meaning of my words. He replied with a nonchalant smirk,
No way.
Regardless, I went into the bedroom to get the luggage I had packed. Mark was mistaken. He probably thought that even if we divorced, he would get half of the property, about $15,000. But that was a mistake. Either way, there was no way Mark could get his hands on a large sum of money. However, just that was too light of a punishment for the insult he threw at Nick and me. And then I thought of a good plan. It would serve Mark right if he got a taste of his own medicine. I returned my bank book to the kitchen drawer, grabbed my luggage and said, I'll mail the divorce papers later. Don't touch the rest of my things. I'll move them when I have time. Perhaps suspicious of my thorough preparation, Mark gave me a puzzled look, but I left the house anyway. I booked a room in a business hotel near the station and decided to spend about a week there. During my hotel stay, I found a rental apartment suitable for living alone. After finalizing the contract with the apartment, I immediately began moving. I returned to the house during Mark's absence in the afternoon to move my belongings, but when I checked the bank book I had left in the drawer, sure enough, money had been withdrawn, leaving a balance of $150,000. This was exactly as I had expected. Mark probably used half as his share and used it to fund the purchase of a brand new house for his mother, but he would regret that later. I got the divorce papers from the city hall, filled them out, and mailed them to Mark. However, even after a week and then 2 weeks, there was no sign of them being delivered to the city hall, and I couldn't reach Mark by phone. After insisting for a while, Mark finally picked up, sounding irritated. Could you hurry up and submit the divorce papers to the city hall?
Divorce papers? Oh, I'll submit them next week.
Get on it! And you withdrew money from my bank account, didn't you? That's illegal to do without my permission, you know.
Idiot, it's not illegal to withdraw money from a family member's account. Besides, half of it would be mine anyway after the divorce, so it's only right that I took it. I'm hanging up now.
Wait a minute. He hung up the phone just like that. But that was fine with me, because Mark had acted just as I had anticipated. A little while later, it seems Mark had finally submitted the divorce papers to the city hall. When I checked, Mark and I were officially divorced. A month later, I was at work. The company that had hired me part-time was hiring full-time employees, and when I applied, they accepted me. I heard a commotion near the company's entrance, and when I went to check it out, to my surprise, Mark and his mother were desperately arguing with the receptionist. I hurried over and exclaimed, "Hold on, what's going on?" When I spoke up, the two of them turned towards me with an incredible urgency. "Karen, we've been looking for you. Please hear us out." "Please, Karen, forgive us." As they started to loudly discuss right then and there, I somehow managed to calm them down, explain the situation to my boss, and we moved to a nearby cafe. "What is this about? I'm troubled if you come to my workplace." The two of them, with pale faces, began desperately explaining to me.
"About the money I withdrew from your account. Turns out it doesn't qualify for property division. That money is..."
I let out a huge sigh of disbelief. "That's what I've been trying to tell you over and over again. That was my separate property. It was the life insurance payout when Nick passed away."
"We didn't know. We're really sorry. We'll try to return the money somehow. Can you not make a big fuss about this?
You're right. You wouldn't want to make a big deal out of this either, right? Let's settle this amicably. Is that all you came to say?
As soon as I said that, their expressions became frantic. Just that?
I already know that. When you withdrew the money from the bank, how did you do it? Don't tell me you think I didn't notice.
Well, that's,
No, we had no choice but to do that because we needed the money.
It's likely this is what happened. You can't withdraw $150,000 all at once from an ATM. It would take too long.
So they probably wanted to withdraw it from the counter, but in large sums, a power of attorney from the person themselves is needed.
I assume my mother-in-law wrote that power of attorney, and she was probably the one who answered the confirmation call from the bank. In essence, my mother-in-law pretended to be me. This is a clear crime. And yet, even now, they were still trying to deceive me about it. There's no way I can forgive this man. Mark pleaded, "Please forgive me. Lawyers have been coming to the office. The stares from the employees are painful, and my boss is asking about the situation. My position is at risk. If anything else happens, I'll have to quit my job and I won't be able to find another one. Please, let's settle this out of court." I was also told by my husband that we're getting a divorce. I was just blinded by the prospect of a brand new house. It was just an impulse. It's true that I managed to recover from Nick's death thanks to this man. So maybe I could forgive him if he was sincere. Yet, in the end, this man also insulted my beloved Nick. If it weren't for that, things wouldn't have gotten this bad. It doesn't concern me. The next time we meet, we'll be in court. Wait, please, Karen. Karen, please. The two of them kneeled right there in the cafe, but I ignored them and walked out. In the end, they were the ones at fault. And ultimately, Mark and my former mother-in-law faced a large claim for damages from me, resulting in a huge debt. The $150,000 withdrawn from my account was returned to me by my former father-in-law out of his own pocket. The newly built house they had purchased was immediately sold, but it only covered a portion of the purchase price. Mark, of course, lost his job. In this day and age, he couldn't find another job and ended up living as a live-in security guard, eating cheap sandwiches every day and living hand-to-mouth while repaying his debt. My former father-in-law divorced my former mother-in-law. She rented a cheap apartment and lives a frugal life while doing part-time jobs every day. Meanwhile, I've been happily living my life, working steadily at my company. I'm back to being single after the divorce, but I believe it's just another part of life and I'm willing to start over. But recently, a wonderful man who is kind and caring has appeared in my life. I'm proceeding with this relationship cautiously so as not to make the same mistake, but I can't help but hope this is a good connection.